Hello, welcome to the SSC Symposium, Measuring the Biofield, Exploring the Science of Energy Healing. My name is Annalisa Ventola. I am the Chief Editor of Edge Science, and I will be your host for this session. I have with me Professor Margaret Moga. She is the chair of this symposium, and I'm delighted to have her as our first speaker. Professor Moga is an associate professor of anatomy, cell biology, and physiology at Indiana University School of Medicine. Her research background is the neuroanatomy of circadian rhythms and the central autonomic nervous system. Her research interests include developing scientific measures of energy healing, the chakras, and other bioenergetic phenomena such as Kundalini, and studying the exceptional experiences of healers and meditators. As a complement to her research, she has completed training as a practitioner in healing touch biofield therapy. So pleased to have you here today. Please go ahead with your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Annalisa, and welcome to everyone on this symposium today. Today, I'm going to talk about the magnetic field activity during energy healing. And I've done some experiments in this area, and I think it's really important, the magnetic field. So I hope you'll agree. I'm also proposing a charge-discharge hypothesis as part of the healing mechanism. It's sort of an early stage of my thoughts, and so I welcome your feedback at the end of the talk. Thank you. All right, energy healing. It includes hands-on healing, distant healing, and the modern term nowadays is biofield therapy. Stanley Krippner actually is studied healers in many different cultures. And he says that healers generally describe what they do in terms of energy, clearing energy, adding energy, removing energies, balancing energy. So some people are a little nervous about using the word energy for energy healing, thinking that it's just information or it's not really energy. But the healers themselves can actually feel the energies. And I felt them myself. That's how I got into this research. I actually was at a healing touch demonstration, and I was sitting in the audience, and I could feel they were doing magnetic passes over a client, and I could feel the energy. So that's how I got into it. The putative energy or the scientific mechanism is currently unknown. And here's some examples of some of the modalities we'll be talking about today: Reiki, Qigong, healing touch, therapeutic touch, polarity therapy, spiritual healing. Those are some of the ones we'll mention here today. In general, scientific studies of energy healing are three main areas. Looking at the effects of healing on a healy, and it can be a plant, an animal, a human, a cell culture. And these include all the clinical studies. And we're not going to cover those here today, but there is some good evidence for an effect. For example, for pain, nausea, depression, anxiety. So there is some good evidence. A second group of studies are studying the healer's physiology, looking at the healer's brain waves, heart rate variability, body voltage potential, and we'll talk about a little bit about that today. And finally, there's measuring the bioemissions. The idea that our bodies are full of all these small cells with electrical potentials, and that we have emit energies, and that we have a biofield surrounding us. And some of those bioemissions include biophotons. We have a good talk coming later in biophotons, a magnetic field, and gamma radiation is another one. And also development of biofield devices. So the goal is to find ways to measure the biofield and then develop devices that practitioners can use with their clients so they can actually get some objective measurements with their own clients. So for background, in order to set the stage for this model of charge-discharge, I need to look at some of the studies, some of the key electromagnetic field studies of energy healing. And so that's what I'm just going to go over now. So we're looking for clues for what's going on. One of the earliest and most interesting is in Dr. Oshman, in his book Energy Medicine, actually puts a prominent place for it, is Zimmerman's experiments. Dr. John Zimmerman was a psychiatrist at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And he actually was recording magnetic fields around the brain and got curious and did some recordings of energy missions from the hands of therapeutic practitioners with a squid magnetometer. At the time in 1985, it was very sensitive. He had a pretty well shielded room. It was, I guess, 2 inches thick of aluminum. It wasn't modern mu metal shielding, but there was some shielding. And what he found, the healer had a client in the shielded room. He observed a unique waveform, and this is just illustrating before the healing session and then during the healing session. You can see that there is a series of variable frequencies and from 0.3 to 30 hertz, most of the activity in the range 7 to 8 hertz. And this was a very high amplitude wave beyond the scale of the squid magnetometer, so he couldn't quantify it. So it was big, it was very big. He replicated this in 5 out of 8 sessions. It wasn't present with non-healers. And so it's been sort of, some people actually call it the Zimmerman wave. The Green study, Green et al., which is known as the copper wall experiments, and Dr. Dunseith today is going to talk about his efforts to replicate these experiments, were also very influential. Green and colleagues, Green was a psychologist in Kansas, and basically with ICEM. And he recorded electric voltage surges and body potential of healers and wall voltage at the same time. So he did both the healer's body and the walls, these copper walls. He basically hooked it up so he could see if there's any change in potential of the walls. And so this is actually a diagram illustrating body potential is a PB. You can see that there's a surge, basically, a change in potential, and there's some oscillations. The healer, I think, was doing a hand movement at the time, but also note all the wall potentials also were changing also, and basically it was some delay from the healer's body potential. So how they understood it was they proposed that energy healing may involve an increase of charge in the healer's body, followed by an emission of charge. So that's sort of an interesting idea. So we'll come back to that. Cito et al. Was another very influential study, 1992. He studied the magnetic field strength adjacent to the palms of 37 Qigong healers. In only 3 out of the cases, though, he was able to observe a magnetic field oscillation. But he called it extraordinary large biomagnetic field strength. It was in the range of 2 to 4 milligauss. That's very large. It's very large. The Earth's magnetic field is close to 500 milligauss. So it's pretty big. It's pretty big. It's much bigger than the heart's magnetic field and the brain's magnetic field. So that's why he was impressed with it. And so this is just showing some of the oscillations that they detected, magnetic field oscillations. Now, a related study that's not often cited is Hisamitsu, also involving Cito, the same lab group. And they found extremely strong magnetic fields from the head and whole body during oriental breathing exercises. So this is another clue. So it's not just energy healing that's creating these big fields. Here they can see that practitioners of a particular breathing technique can basically increase their magnetic field near the body to the 1 to 3 milligauss range. So this is, and they also found there were no changes with basically a store-bought AC digital magnetometer. And note that the store-bought has basically bandpass. Basically, it doesn't capture any frequencies below 30 hertz, and that's a key thing too. Is most of these frequencies are below 30 hertz, and so if you have a magnetometer that you purchase, and if it's filtering out any of the low frequencies, then you're not going to see any oscillations. So that's a very important point for those of you who want to try this at home. We'll come back to it in discussion. Gary Schwartz's group in Arizona with Dr. Melinda Connor, who's here with us today, recorded milligauss magnetic field oscillations adjacent to the hands of Reiki healers. So Reiki healers can produce these, but we'll talk about that. I'm not sure, or she'll talk about it, whether they produce this sort of oscillations all the time or certain healers are better at it than others. It's a discussion for today. Finally, there's another study that people don't reference very much. It was in the Subtle Energies Journal. It's Dr. Levengood. He was a plant physiologist, I believe, in Michigan, and he wrote up a summary of his research that appeared in Penny Kelly's book, Consciousness and Energy, Volume 2. And I think it's worth reading what his observations were. And for today, what's I found very important is Levengood and Getwe, it was a physician that he worked with, observed oscillatory electrical currents when the people would put their hands on two plates. Basically, they were creating a like capacitive type monitoring system, and basically measuring the voltage, the charge on those plates. And they found that emotions, pain, sexual intercourse influenced these charge density pulses. And so those groups of things seem to be cases where people get charged. There's a certain charge, electrical charge in the body. We'll come back to that. Recently, well, not too recently, 2013, Dr. Baldwin and colleagues, they tried to reproduce Zimmerman. They actually had some Reiki healers with a sensitive squid magnetometer in a shielded chamber. But they didn't observe any large amplitude signals. They weren't able to replicate the Zimmerman wave with these healers. So they speculated among multiple possibilities that the Reiki healers may be different from the therapeutic touch and Qigong healers who were previously observed to emit high intensity electromagnetic fields. So it's just an open question here. And finally, I want to talk about some experiments I did with healing touch practitioners and also with Dr. Bengston with the mice, his healing of the mice. So we did a study together and looking at tumor remission in mice. My lab injected tumor fragments into the mice. He did 3 hands-on healing sessions followed by distant healing of the mice. And we did see tumor reduction. It's quite something to actually see it in person. I know most of you have heard of Dr. Bengston's studies of tumor remission in mice. But what was unique is that we did some magnetic field recording. And I tried recording from his head, from his hands. And the strongest signal was near where he was focusing his attention. He was focusing his attention on the mice. And that was actually very helpful because then when he went back to New York, I'm in Indiana, we could continue to record magnetic field potential next to the mouse cages. And so we were able to pick up some magnetic field oscillations when he sent healing. And this is just an example showing a baseline, the distant healing. We see this oscillation. And if we expand that portion of it, you can see it changes frequency. And then post-healing, we would see a couple more healing waves would pop on the screen. And so what we found is that we were able to replicate the Zimmerman wave because if you compare the two, this is A in this figure is the Zimmerman wave that's displayed in Oshman's book, Energy Medicine. And this is a magnetic field wave one of the waves that we saw. You can see it's pretty much the same wave. And that sort of makes sense, right? I mean, because the Zimmerman wave is most likely in the milligauss range, because we were talking about all these other in Cito and Schwartz, people are all seeing these waves in the milligauss range. So that you should be able to detect them in the unshielded environment. So it's not, people think that you can only do it with shielding, but this is a big wave. So this is, for me, I mean, you can disagree with me in discussion, but I think that we can replicate the Zimmerman wave and we need to study it more in unshielded environments. But anyway, let me keep going. So then I did a series of experiments with the healing touch practitioners. I looked at, initially looked at 26 healing touch therapy sessions, 13 healers, 26 clients, 1 to 4 clients per healer. We saw the same magnetic field oscillations, but of course I'm using the same magnetometer, a sensitive Hall type geomagnetic atometer that really captures the low frequencies, particularly 0 to 10 hertz. So it's really very specialized for low frequencies. And so we did see the Zimmerman wave. The oscillations, very interestingly, varied in amplitude. And And I also noted it was very early on. I had a healer who I recorded magnetic field activity when they did a session on a client, and she said later that she felt a release, an energetic release on one side and then on the other side. And of course, I have two magnetometers, one on each side. And sure enough, I saw a wave first on that side, she said, and then a wave on the second side. So that started me. That was very early in this study. That maybe that when healers say they're feeling energetic releases, it's these waves are popping basically. There's a release that these waves are showing. So here's some examples of magnetic field activity and healing touch, just showing we can get very quiet baseline. But of course, I'm filtering everything 0 to 40 hertz. I'm trying to filter out 60 hertz, any of the noise that's usually in the normal environment. So I'm really focused on that low frequencies, which are physiological frequencies, which are basically are embedded in the Zimmerman wave, are part of the Zimmerman wave. So once again, you can see just that's what we're seeing. And then if I show you what magnetic field activity looks like during a healing touch therapy, I usually record a baseline, a pre-healing touch, and then basically the healer and on the minutes is on the right. 0 meaning the beginning of the session, 60 minutes. It was a 60-minute session. And you can see it. Most healers, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to sort of magnetic field activity to start increasing in amplitude. And then we have sort of at the middle of the waveform at 60 minutes. And then it takes time for the magnetic field activity in the room to die down. So that's this is sort of a characteristic healing touch session looking at the magnetic field activity. I have a couple more examples. So we have here, and this was sort of, I'm putting the the punchline to the top of the screen. Emotions is a low frequency magnetic field. So in general, low amplitude magnetic field oscillations during healing touch were associated with physical symptoms and pain release. High amplitude were associated with emotions and or heaviness in the field. If they came in with a symptom of emotions like depression or anxiety, that's what we're talking about. So we would be clearing the field of the heaviness of that emotion. Low amplitudes would be, for example, if they have, and here's a good example right here in the session here. This is in 2A. So this is an illustration. He was a healing touch instructor, very experienced, did 4 clients in a single day. And so each of these are just some snapshots of what the magnetic field activity looked like for these different sessions. In the first one, the patient presented with fibromyalgia, was very achy, very lot of pain, and so we did see small amplitude waves during that session. And one example is at 30 minutes. In the second session, it was just a young man, very healthy, just a muscle sprain in his leg. We didn't see any because I'm recording up near the heart and the torso. We didn't capture anything down in his legs. So basically, there was no waves during his session. And then the 2C was also another healthy control. It was a healing touch student, an advanced student, basically, and there were no magnetic field waves. He had no complaints. So that was another healthy control. And then the fourth one was a woman her daughter had recently been, a very young daughter, had recently given birth, and then right after had been diagnosed with cancer. So she was taking care of her grandchild and her daughter at the same time. And she was really just really had a lot of strong emotions. And so it was quite a dramatic session. The healer said that towards the end of the session, he felt something very heavy in her heart area, and he tried to clear it. And all of a sudden, these very large waves, the big release, a very big release. She felt it. She felt the release. And so, and the waves kept going on. As you can see, very high amplitude down there at 87 minutes in that fourth session, and 122 way past when the session ended around 60 minutes. So it came at the very end of the session, and the waves sort of kept going, reverberating in the room after the client had left. Now, this is just, I tried to understand when the high amplitude magnetic field oscillations, which were generally greater than 1 milligauss. These are the big ones. And there were about eight sessions out of the 26. And all 8 of those, the healer detected congestion, heaviness, or density in the client biofield. One example would be one woman, the client had depression. Her good friend had recently died, and there's a lot of heaviness in her head area. And when the healer cleared that, there was very large, high amplitude waves. So emotions can be very heavy in the field, and so then we get these large waves when the healer clears them. The other one is if the client reports a emotional component like anxiety, and that's cleared, that can trigger large magnetic field waves also. So it was just interesting to see what was triggering the large amplitude waves as opposed to the small amplitude. And the small amplitude, really, I did see some pain reduction cases. A woman came in with a painful elbow, and the healer basically they had no pain after the session, and there were small waves during that session. So that's why I sort of it's a hypothesis. Need to test it further. And then this linger effect, which I've sort of alluded to, that when large waves develop in a session, they still remain in the room. And so what's interesting then, the next client is moving into those waves, and these are low frequency magnetic field waves. And so I wondered, I still wonder if these could actually be beneficial to the next client. In this case, it might be. Here we have a different healer. Saw four clients in a single day. First was for work stress. Actually, she was a nurse doing night shifts, so a sort of a stressful. And so they would develop some high amplitude magnetic field waves towards the end of her session, which then reverberated into the next session. And then next client was actually had lifelong asthma, and she had a lot of heaviness in the chest area from the asthma, and so even the waves kept going. And so it wasn't until later with some quieter clients with sinusitis or shoulder pain basically the magnetic field activity died down. And this is known in parapsychology as the linger effect. There was a very early study showing if a healer healed mice in a certain area and then later went away, and then you put those control mice in that area, they also experienced healing. So there was sort of a linger effect, a change in the environment, a conditioning of the environment. So it just is something to think about. I did a series of mock healing touch. I was always looking for control experiments. And I came up with an idea of having the healer have an imaginary client on the table and then actually move around and treat the imaginary client with healing touch for about 60 minutes to compare it with the other sessions. And actually it turned out very well, actually. And so this is just an example of healer here, healer P, doing a mock session first, a very quiet magnetic field activity, no waves, and then having a real client come in and showing once again the magnetic field wave, which then reverberated into the lunch hour, post-healing touch. And then a different healer came in and did the mock healing touch, quiet again, and with another client later. So it did work. It actually showed there was no movement artifacts in the room when the healer was literally moving around the table without a client. So it was actually very useful controls. Finally, just out of curiosity, I know a number of you are interested in like med beds and just using frequencies for healing. I don't have enough cases, but I did do a spectral analysis of unfiltered magnetic field activity during healing touch, and there were big other peaks, frequency peaks, in these waves, not just within that 0 to 40 hertz. And so this is the next example, just showing that for different sessions with different healers, there's different frequencies, and I don't know what they mean, but we'll just, down the road, maybe this all makes sense. So just let you know that because these might be for particular symptoms or particular clients may need particular frequencies. We don't know. So this is a very beginning of the biofield science. Finally, for healing touch, I was really fortunate to record in 2 healing touch classes with Deborah Larimore, a healing touch instructor in North Carolina. And so I had one magnetometer near her table where she would give it out demonstrations, and another magnetometer among the student tables. And so just showing this, the instructor demo, she was doing a trauma release. So as you would imagine, on one of the students, it was some very large amplitude waves. And what's interesting is that healing touch really doesn't talk about doing attunements of the students, but in a way that this energy in this room is like an attunement, like a Reichian attunement, because you are being bathed in these very large magnetic field waves. And finally, just showing some of the magnetic field activity adjacent to the student tables. This is the second class out of 5. And so the students are still beginning students. And according to Janet Menken down here, founder of Healing Touch, beginning students are not able to hold charge. And so there were no really big magnetic field waves in the student practice area. So I suspect my thinking is generally level 3, they would teach us a meditation called Hara meditation that sort of charges up the body. And then I think then you start to see effects during sessions. I wanted to cover and just magnetic field recordings of other non-healing bioenergetic phenomena, because these are all clues to sort of what's going on. So these magnetic field waves are not just in energy healing, they're in other healing situations, in other health beneficial situations. One was, once again, I was doing a control experiment. I was at a magnetometer in an office down the hall, 3 days basically, and just 2 women working, doing office work, answering the phone, signing people up for classes, health classes. And on 2 of those 3 days, the magnetic field activity was, as you could see on the left here, very, very quiet. It's a very quiet job. And then on the 3rd day, all of a sudden, I look at it at the end of the day, and I'm like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And I ran down the hall. And I said, what happened? What happened? And she starts laughing. The executive director, she starts laughing. And turns out they had talked about how messy their husbands were. Actually, they'd sort of had this frustration at home, and they just both sort of had a real good session, a therapeutic talk session, and these large waves that just sort of. And they knew something had happened. They knew something had happened. So this tells us, my goodness, the talk therapy that everyone thinks nothing's happening, that possibly therapeutic conversations can be measurable energetic interactions. And this simple, heartfelt conversation reverberated for hours. And I think they both felt a healing, basically something coming off their chest, some frustrations they had at home. So really a powerful fortuitous event. I did travel down to Monroe Institute, like many of you, and I attended, this is for the guidelines program. And it was one of those classes where all of a sudden you felt like you knew everyone. There was incredible synergy of the group, just immediately. And at one of the evening social hours, I set up a magnetometer in the kitchen den area where people were talking. And the magnetic field activity at this party was quite impressive. And you could feel it. It was like being in a cloud. It was quite dense. It was definitely a field there. And it went on for hours, and people eventually went to bed. And there were a couple of people talking in the middle of the night, and they saw a light flash about where that 78 minute marker is, about in the middle of the wave. So that's something else to look at. But just another idea of conversations and group work producing changes in the local magnetic field. Finally, another type of control I did was I would have just clients, no healers. So I would have the clients would come in and just listen to a CBD by Dr. Norm Shealy. He basically led the client in a guided progressive muscle relaxation. So the beginning of the CD is you tense different groups of muscles and areas of the body, and you release them. So there is a tension, contraction, relaxation in this thing, and then finally some affirmations. And so if we look at that, compare it with the healing touch, we see a higher baseline. These are not trained healers; they are not clearing the space, but we do see some low amplitude magnetic oscillations. I think it's due to this muscle activity and this releasing of tension in their muscles. And then I've also done, just in that same theme of exercise and muscles, I did a recording during a Tai Chi workshop, and I did see these magnetic field oscillations. And so my thinking is that part of it, the charge that we have from eating and just build up of stresses during the ordinary day is sort of discharged during exercise. And that's a beneficial aspect of exercise. Releasing these waves are a sign of it. Now, I was always looking for people who had also seen this wave. And I did find a couple of individuals who've seen this particularly at sacred sites in Sedona, Sedona vortexes, and Benjamin Lone Tree is one, and then it's sort of here. And then Marshall Hancock Adams, who's an SSE member, she's seen these waves in outdoors, actually, at sacred sites. And so if you look a little closely, you can see that it's a little blurry here, but you see the increase in the amplitude and the slowing of the wave, like we see with in the energy healing sessions. And so it's just interesting that maybe there's some environmental correlates to this wave. Finally, I just wanted now to look at the charge-discharge hypothesis here. So, looking at charge-discharge dynamics in human psychophysiology, Wilhelm Reich originally described life force as orgone energy, and he actually, the beginning, he focused on sexual orgasm, but he did note 4 phases, not just tension relaxation. He's noted tension, bioelectric charge, bioelectric discharge, and relaxation, 4 phases. And then recently, Anodea Judith wrote a really important book, I think, Charge in the Energy Body, where she thinks it's more useful to think of the life force as charge. How much charge do you have? How much juice do you have basically flowing in your life? And she actually has expanded this wave, stimulus, charge, discharge, relaxation. And this sort of looks like the magnetic field activity and like healing touch, just showing that sort of there is that buildup and then sustained and then a slow discharge and relaxation. So it's just interesting that idea. And here's the next. So what activities are associated with charging and discharging? And this is from her book, inhaling, exhaling, discharge. And remember that first study we had, Hizamitsu, where a breathing exercise can increase a magnetic field. I would say that would be increasing the electric charge, electric currents in the body, and then the resultant magnetic field. And then others, sexual arousal is a charging, feeling and emotions. We see emotions are very important. And just discharging, for example, exercise, conversation can be charging and discharging, yawning, another one. So how I view it now is that energy healing is part of a spectrum of the human physiology, sort of a holistic. If we look at the physiology of the whole body, there's a charge-discharge process that occurs in some types of energy healing. I wouldn't say all, but definitely healing touch. And yeah, so these magnetic field changes that we're seeing aren't just in energy healing. So we saw them with conversations. I've seen them with yawning. We've seen them with the Tai Chi, with exercise. I have looked at sexual orgasm. These same magnetic field waves are there too. And also in parapsychology, they see these large milligauss abnormal fields. For example, recently I heard a talk on telekinesis, and they picked up some milligauss fields. So it's sort of a normal. The body, we don't know how it does it, but it has the ability to emit these very large magnetic fields. Now, grounding and earthing. Some of you have seen this. Very important. Ashman has emphasized it. Is a discharge, basically keeping basically the body healthy. But the contact with the earth is also a charge. Those of you who are sensitive to the energies in the body, if you work in the garden, you come back in and you can feel that earth energy is sort of moving up your legs. It sounds funny, but yeah, it's a energy. So just to wrap it up here, what's the significance of the magnetic field oscillations? These are physiological frequencies. They're 0.1 to 30 hertz, maybe part of a healing mechanisms or health maintenance, actually. And they have, in labs, we've seen that weak magnetic fields can slow cancer growth, improve survival. In the Persinger lab, they actually have I believe it was WHO and all, HU, a paper showing significant tumor regression with an artificial magnetic field called the Thomas field, which it's sort of similar to sort of the Zimmerman wave, actually. Very fascinating, really very powerful. So how I view it now is that the periodic release of the charge buildup may help maintain health. And so I see it. So energy healing is part of this health maintenance. And I think that's probably the way that we're going to gain acceptance, is that we see it as part of the larger picture of human physiology. And then finally, two more slides. Dr. Connor is going to talk about this. But the idea, healing touch, practitioners, I think in my mind as magnetic healers, because I certainly can see what they do to the magnetic field. They remind me of Mesmer and the magnetic passes. Reiki, the Reiki healers I've seen, they're glowing. Some of them, they're really emitting light, very sweet spiritual energy. I could be wrong, but like I said, Dr. Connor will talk with us later. And then there's this funny healing called nervous system energy work in Ohio. And I've included the link there. They actually were very fascinated by a healer named William Gray, who said that there was sound. You could heal with light, which most healers do, and you could also heal with sound. And he actually demonstrated it. And I guess so people have been fascinated, but try to replicate his work. And actually, in the nervous system energy work, they, instead of charging up, they tried to do like polarity therapy of just balancing how the flows within the body. So, but my point here is to replicate the Zimmerman wave, you may need a magnetic healer, someone who could build up a charge so it can be discharged, as is true in some Qigong healing methods. And finally, there's always a question: how does energy healing work? All I know is it's probably a dual level mechanism, accounting for both local effects and distant non-local effects, the tangible with the intangible. Recently, I read an article, an old article, but space with counter space, the idea of points of space in our 3D world that we're here, and then space that's basically based on planes, a lot more potential, more like Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields, sort of that's two dual sort of reality here. And it's also found in Tiller's work. Dr. Tiller found that there's the physical space versus a conjugate physical that could influence each other. And finally, I'm always fascinated with extra dimensions, and so we'll see how that goes. But that's where the end of my talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation. We have quite a few questions that I'm gonna, and you might see them yourself here in the Q&A box. I'm gonna start with, Keith has 3 questions. They all seem pretty brief, pretty rapid fire, so I'm just gonna run those by you first, and then we'll get to the others. And so this was asked very early in your presentation. What is the magnitude of the electromagnetic signal in, dBm or watts, approximately?
No, I'm measuring magnetic field. So I'm measuring in milligauss. So that's where mine is. So you would think of Teslas or Gauss would be for the magnetic field. So I'm not doing watts, would be electrical. So I'm not doing, so mine is the low. I can, like I said, I've got some in that low. Most of it is like 0.75 milligauss and up to maybe 2 milligauss. So I'm in that low range that other people found with the magnetic field oscillations. That's where I am. Yeah.
And are these magnetic fields originating from the operator or the subject?
Well, originally I put the placed electrodes because I thought maybe it would be the healer, but I'm working with Bengston, Dr. Bengston. I have a sense that this wave is concentrated near the client, but it could be the two together. It could be, there's actually, Dr. Vicky Slater says there's a magnetic induction between client and healer, and so it would be one field. And some people have shown that. I think Dr. Oshman shows it as being sort of a one field together. But then here's another interesting thing. I was led to record near the heart chakra. I've been doing some chakra readings recently, and with I wonder if the chakras are involved with this. So that was because I had trouble. I wasn't recording getting much up near the head area or the foot area, and so I think I want, if I would go back, I would check different chakras for the magnetic fields. Yeah.
And then one more from him. And are successful healings confirmed by physicians, or is it the opinion of the subject?
I wasn't, and I guess that's the weakness of my research. I did not follow up on, I did interviews of all the clients and the healers afterwards. And so I did not, well, I did get some feedback. Actually. I had a woman who had a heart disease, and she'd been given some medications, and those medications had created such an awful side effect that she developed severe anxiety, and then she had to see another doctor for the anxiety medicine. And so she came in for the healing touch, and we really, honest to goodness, we really helped her because she didn't need the anxiety was gone, basically. So there were some dramatic ones, but none confirmed by physicians. No, and like I said, that's the weakness, is that I don't have. I wasn't looking at that. I was just looking to see if these waves were real. I went to different locations with different healers. It was an exploratory study.
Okay. This should be a quick one. Can you please give us the title of Andrea Judith's book? I can't find it under her name.
It should be Charge in the Energy Body. It was 2018.
All right. John Cruth asks, can you describe the equipment and exactly where the sensors are placed? Are they on the body, near the body, or generally in the location?
Yeah, thank you. I had a slide on it, and I didn't slip it in there. They're about 2 feet away from the client, 2 to 3 feet. I left a little bit of space for the healer to move around the massage table. So they're actually, I'm recording environmental magnetic field activity. I'm not recording on the body. So yes, that's a very key point. But then of course this is a biofield symposium with the biofield, yes, I'm measuring out about 2 to 3 feet. And it's these are magnetometers. They're in the papers. They're really designed for very low frequencies, because the geomagnetic field has the bulk of the geomagnetic field storms are like less than 1 hertz. So you really want a sensitive a magnetometer that's really getting the very low frequencies for geomagnetic fields. Yep.
What influences change in waves during the single therapy session?
Well, I did a series of experiments on myself. I did mock healing touch, and I have that in my paper. Did 10 sessions of mock healing touch myself, and I found it was my consciousness and also my physical. If I wasn't feeling well, it would change the magnetic field activity. If I was feeling sort of emotional, or my thoughts weren't focused, it would change the magnetic field activity. So it's so that's why the healers really have to have centered and clear. So they don't influence it. Yeah.
Okay. Have there been magnetic field measurements from animals?
No, and I thought one example would be just yawning, just to do if I could get my cats to yawn on cue, I could measure that discharge. And I did do some recordings out in nature. I thought at first I was picking up some birds that were fluttering around the magnetometer, but it's an important thing, because I believe the same activity is non-human also. Yeah.
I think you might have answered this before, but real quick from Eric Dullen, which instrument do you use to measure? And then the follow-up, and what is the exact setup to make the measurement? I think that was related to John's question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's Integrity Design is the company, and it's actually an engineer. He designs his own magnetometers. It's commercially available, geomagnetic magnetometer. I'm happy it's in my papers. And then I used, I'm glad he asked, because for continuous recording, you need a recorder and you need some software to capture the signal. And I went with a physiology setup, basically. It's called LabScribe is the name of the company. And they basically have recorders it was just really convenient. And then they had a really good software, LabScribe software. So I'm happy to share that with you, Eric. So but I'm not, it's pretty basic. It's mainly the software that's usually for teaching physiology to students. So I'm not at the top of the line for equipment. Yeah.
All right. The questions just keep coming. In terms of the chirping of the magnetic field, is the coarse frequency or the dense frequency part correlating with the initiation of the healing?
The dense frequency. I think I know what you mean. I'm not totally sure. At first, I thought they were chirps. But couldn't they just be longitudinal waves, magnetic waves? I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah. But there it does seem to, and there's an oddness, and it's almost like the wave is reversing. Maybe it's spiraling one way and then spiraling back the other way. So I wish we had other ways of measuring these particular waves. Yeah.
This one came from the chat from Rick Zikowitz. Does healing touch impact a client who is shielded by mu metal, or is in a Faraday cage?
Well, the people have done other studies looking at the shielding doesn't matter for certainly for obtaining information in parapsychology. The shielding doesn't matter. So no one's done that study. Yeah. We've never put
I would be interested to see that.
Yeah, actually. Put a client in a shielded. Yeah.
Because I'm aware of that result as well in parapsychology.
Yes.
I'm always curious about where our actual differences are when it comes to healing and other side capabilities. One more here. Has there been any thought given to the possibility that healers come into some sort of resonance with the Schumann resonances, which might represent the source of the energy?
Well, I started to look at that, and the Schumann resonances are pretty, on the surface of the Earth, from what I've read, they're pretty really low amplitude, really, really low, and that's why they put them in very uninhabited surroundings, far away from humans. And so, and I had this funny idea that if all these life on Earth is creating low frequency waves, maybe we're contributing to the life is contributing to the Schumann resonance. Not just, I know it's the lightning and the ionosphere, and but I just it is. Dr. Oshman is and Dr. Baldwin in her paper, they talk about the Schumann resonance possibly being important for the source. Yeah. So people have speculated, but I'm not sure. Okay.
Dutching has a follow-up question. He says, your frequency analysis showed quite a few high-frequency components that are also much higher in amplitude. Do you plan to analyze those high-frequency signals?
Yeah. My long-term goal was, I figured I needed like 120 sessions, and I could see if there's anything I needed to. Yeah, I'd like to see if there are particular complaints. If multiple people have depression, for example, will they have particular high frequencies will show up in the recording. Yeah, no, I think it's really important for down the road developing healing devices. Yeah.
I'm going to do one more question because we're getting close to the end of our session, even though they keep coming. Has there been research done on feeling drained, that feeling that can happen after social interactions? Is this possibly an unhealthy release of energy?
Yeah, Anna Deo Judith, that's why I like her book. She talks about you can discharge too much, she says. so it's time to move away from that and find another way to gather up some energy again. Yeah.
And finally, I'm just going to ask a question of my own. I'm really interested in scientists, practitioners, and I know that you are yourself a practitioner of healing touch therapy. And I wonder, what what do you perceive as both like the challenges and the advantages of that scientist practitioner position?
Well, it guides the questions, and it guides the understanding. I mean, once you feel it, you see it. It's amazing experiences. I know other scientists, practitioners. My goodness, I just wow. When you see light coming into the chakras, and I had one case with a woman I really fond of, a client, and all of a sudden we heard bells ringing in the room, and they weren't
Wow.
outside; they were in the room. So you start to see these things, and so you see the potential. You see the potential for human interactions, and it's very exciting. And then the whole thing with the spiritual guides, that's a fascinating one. I tried to record ultrasound because I thought that there were some high frequencies with the guides, and I almost got something, and I just, oh man, I mean, there's stuff that we can study, and I think doing the training helps you understand what the healers are experiencing. Yeah.
I found too that sometimes being in that position will help with the kind of questions that you think to ask. There's questions that you would never think of if you're not a practitioner. Uh, and I find that helpful as well too. Well, thank you so much for your talk. Thank you too also for chairing the symposium. Being chair means that Margaret has arranged all of the speakers and the schedule for us today, so we can thank you in advance for the excellent symposium that is happening today. And I hope everybody will stick around for the next session, which is, I'm going to view the schedule. This is the AMI, a promising electrodermal device for biofield science. That is going to be happening in about 12 minutes. So please stick around, make use of the social lounge while we prep our next speaker, and I will see you back here soon. Thank you very much.